Beneath the North Sea, off the Suffolk coast, lie the submerged ruins of a medieval town that once rivaled London in scale and significance. 8 churches, 2 friaries, a harbour crowded with merchant vessels from across Europe, all lost to centuries of storms and coastal erosion. Dunwich, capital of the Kingdom of East Anglia in the 7th century and a thriving international port through the High Middle Ages, now exists as little more than a village of 183 inhabitants and Europe's largest underwater archaeological site. To reconstruct what has vanished beneath the waves, this video uses AI-generated imagery based on historical research and archaeological evidence. The reconstructions are interpretive. Small inconsistencies may appear, but they allow us to visualize a city otherwise accessible only through fragmentary documents and submerged stonework. This is the story of Dunwich across 13 centuries, from its foundation as an Anglo-Saxon bishopric, through its prosperity as a medieval trading hub, to the catastrophic storms that consumed it street by street, leaving only memory and ruins beneath the tide. In the year 629, a Burgundian monk named Felix arrived on the Suffolk coast bearing papal authority and royal blessing. King Sigebert of East Anglia had invited him to establish a bishopric in his newly Christian kingdom, and Felix chose a harbour settlement where a modest river met the North Sea. The location may have been the place recorded in monastic chronicles as Domach, though the connection remains uncertain. What is clear is that this coastal foundation became the episcopal seat for a vast territory stretching across East Anglia, and that the settlement which grew around it would carry the name Dunwich into history. The choice of site revealed strategic thinking that balanced spiritual ambition with practical advantage. Whilst many early English bishoprics took root in former Roman towns or inland royal centres, Felix established his church beside a natural harbour where trading vessels could shelter from North Sea storms. The river mouth provided access to agricultural hinterlands, whilst the sea lanes connected East Anglia to the Frankish kingdoms and beyond. A bishop required wealth to sustain his household, fund his clergy and project authority, and maritime commerce offered that wealth more reliably than rents from scattered farmland. For 2 centuries, bishops resided at Dunwich, overseeing the spiritual life of a kingdom that stretched from the fens to the Suffolk coast. Manuscripts record their names and occasional disputes, though the details of daily ecclesiastical administration have not survived. The town itself expanded around the episcopal precinct, its timber buildings clustering along lanes that led from the harbour to the church, its economy sustained by the movement of goods and pilgrims. Archaeological surveys have confirmed substantial Saxon occupation, though the precise extent of 7th century Dunwich remains conjectural beneath later medieval deposits and the advancing sea. The arrangement ended abruptly around 870 when Danish forces swept through East Anglia, dismantling the kingdom's political and ecclesiastical structures. The bishops departed, their seat eventually reconstituted elsewhere, and Dunwich entered a period of transformation under Scandinavian influence. When the Domesday Commissioners arrived 2 centuries later to assess William the Conqueror's new realm, they found a thriving port town with 3 churches and perhaps 3,000 inhabitants. The episcopal foundation had vanished into memory, but the harbour Felix had chosen continued to serve the ambitions of merchants, kings, and eventually an entire medieval borough whose wealth would eclipse its monastic origins. The Norman conquest brought neither ruin nor upheaval to Dunwich. Instead, the town flourished under its new overlords who recognised the harbour's value and the wealth flowing through its wharves. By 1086, when royal commissioners arrived to compile the Domesday Survey, they recorded a settlement of remarkable vitality. 3 churches already stood, and scribes estimated the population at 3,000 souls, a figure that placed Dunwich amongst the most populous towns in all of England. The sheltered anchorage where the River Dunwich met the North Sea drew merchants from across the Channel and beyond, their ships laden with Flemish cloth, French wine, Baltic timber. Within decades, the town's skyline grew dense with spires. St. Bartholomew's and St. Michael's, both chapels of ease serving the expanding populace, rose by the century's end. Before 1175, the parish church of St. Martin welcomed its first congregation. In 1189, the Knights Templar arrived, establishing a preceptory with a circular nave designed in conscious imitation of the Temple Church in London, a declaration in stone of Dunwich's place within the networks of Christendom. When Robert de Beaumont, 3rd Earl of Leicester, laid siege to the town in 1173 during the revolt against Henry II, Dunwich held. Its defences, its wealth, and its strategic importance ensured survival. The 13th century witnessed the town's fullest flowering. 8 parish churches now served the faithful, their towers visible from approaching ships miles out to sea. St. Peter's stretched as long as the great church at Blythe-Brew, its nave crowded on feast days with merchants, guild members, mariners. The Franciscans built their Grey Friars Friary, the Dominicans their Black Friars Priory, the latter founded during the reign of Henry III through the patronage of Roger Holish, a benefactor whose name survives in foundation charters. Chapels dedicated to St. Francis, St. Catherine and St. Leonard dotted the streets. The leper hospital of St. James, grim testament to medieval urban life, occupied its own precinct beyond the town walls. At its zenith, Dunwich sprawled across an area comparable to 14th century London, though its population remained smaller. The harbour thrummed with activity, shipwrights hammered at hulls hauled onto slipways, coopers fitted barrels for export. Stevedores heaved bales of wool destined for Flanders. The Templar Preceptory functioned as more than a religious house. It served as banker and vault. In 1309, the order held deposits totalling £111, 14 shillings and sixpence, a fortune entrusted by figures such as Robert of Seffield, parson of Brampton. The sum spoke to the confidence merchants and clergy alike placed in Dunwich's stability, its permanence. No voice then whispered of erosion. No almanac predicted the storms gathering over the North Sea. The harbour lay calm, the river mouth fixed, the wharves crowded. Dunwich stood as one of England's foremost international ports, its wealth visible in every carved capital, every painted rood screen, every laden cart rumbling through its gates. If this journey through Dunwich's lost world resonates with you, consider becoming a channel member. Your support helps me keep rebuilding these vanished cities, frame by frame. The first blow came at dawn on the first day of the year 1286. A storm surge breached the eastern edge of Dunwich with such force that buildings along the seafront collapsed into the waves before their occupants could flee. Timber beams splintered, thatch roofs vanished seaward, and the harbour wall cracked beneath the weight of water driven inland by gales from the northeast. It was not the first storm the town had weathered, but it marked the beginning of something from which Dunwich would never recover. 13 months later, in February 1287, the sea returned. The South England flood swept across the coast with catastrophic force, tearing through weakened defences and carving great sections of the shoreline into the tide. Churches that had stood for generations found themselves perched on crumbling cliff edges. Wharves collapsed. Warehouses tilted and fell. Before the year ended, a second flood struck in December, the feast of St. Lucia, and this time entire streets disappeared beneath the surf. The harbour that had sheltered trading vessels from Flanders and the Baltic began to silt as sand and shingle choked the river mouth. The storms did not abate. On the 14th of January 1328, another fierce gale battered what remained of the eastern quarter. Buildings that had survived earlier floods now succumbed, their foundations exposed where soil had been. The Franciscan friary lost part of its precinct wall. Merchants watched helplessly as goods stored near the waterfront vanished overnight. 19 years later, in 1347, a storm of even greater ferocity swept approximately 400 houses into the sea in a single night. Families who had clung to their rebuilt homes were forced westward, crowding into what little remained of the old town centre. Then came the Groe tu man Drenku, the great drowning of men, around the 16th of January 1362. This tempest eclipsed all that had preceded it. Entire parishes were obliterated. The church of St. Leonard, which had stood since the 11th century, toppled into the advancing waves. St. Nicholas followed soon after. The harbour, already silted and compromised, ceased to function. Vessels that once docked at Dunwich now sailed 2.5 miles north to Walber's Wick, where the River Blythe offered safer anchorage. The River Dunwich itself shifted course, its mouth drawn northward by the relentless reshaping of the coast. Within 76 years, the sea had consumed what had taken 4 centuries to build. The town that once sent ships to Gascony and hosted royal councils now lay fractured and depopulated, its eastern half submerged, its western half clinging to eroding cliffs. The friaries emptied, the markets fell silent. Those who remained did so out of stubbornness or poverty, watching the tide advance year after year, knowing that what the sea had taken, it would not return. The storm of 1362 had severed more than buildings from their foundations. It had severed Dunwich from its future. When the floodwaters receded, the mouth of the River Dunwich had shifted 2.5 miles north to Walberswick, taking with it the sheltered anchorage that merchants and ship captains had relied upon for centuries. Without a harbour, a port has no purpose. Without purpose, a town empties. The abandonment came neither quickly nor dramatically. Families departed in the months and years following the disaster, merchants relocated their warehouses to harbours that still functioned, ship owners found new berths elsewhere along the coast. The corporation maintained its legal status, continued to send 2 members to Parliament, but the substance beneath these forms dissolved. Sea defences, once maintained through collective effort and economic necessity, fell into disrepair. No one invested in protecting what no longer generated wealth. The churches, those monuments to medieval prosperity, surrendered one by one to the advancing tide. St. Martin's, which had survived the earlier storms, disappeared between 1335 and 1408. St. Francis Chapel, built on hope after the 1286 catastrophe, vanished in the 16th century. St. Catherine's Chapel followed. Each loss marked not just the destruction of stone and timber, but the erasure of a parish, a community, a reason to remain. In 1322, following the suppression of the Knights Templar, their properties passed to the Knights Hospitallers. The transfer mattered little to Dunwich. By 1385, the Dominicans at Blackfriars were preparing to relocate inland to Blytheborough, though the priory itself remained active. The Franciscans at Greyfriars, having prudently moved inland after 1286, continued their work until 1539, when Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries closed their doors after 253 years of continuous operation. The Tudor period completed what the medieval storms had begun. In 1562, Elizabeth I's commissioners ordered the temple preceptory demolished, its foundations washed away during the reign of Charles I. St. John the Baptist, the cruciform church that had anchored the northern quarter, was dismantled in the 1540s, its stone carted away for use elsewhere. St. Peter's eastern gable toppled in 1688. The remainder followed 9 years later. In 1717, the last building of Blackfriars slid into the sea. By the middle of the 18th century, All Saints' Church stood alone amongst fields and coastal scrub, serving a congregation that could no longer justify weekly services. Fortnightly gatherings gave way to monthly attendance. The corporation, having lost its town hall to erosion, conducted its affairs from a cottage. Dunwich retained its parliamentary seats, its ancient borough status, but these were legal fictions stretched across an absence. The town had become what the sea had always intended, memory written in salt water and sand. By the opening of the 19th century, Dunwich existed in name alone as a settlement of any significance. The population had dwindled to 237 inhabitants by the mid-century mark, scattered amongst cottages and farmsteads, where once had stood guild halls and merchant houses. An observer in 1844 described it as a decayed and disfranchised borough, its former grandeur visible only in crumbling walls and the single medieval church that still clung to the cliff edge. The Reform Act of 1832 had stripped away the town's final pretence of importance. For centuries, Dunwich had retained the right to send 2 members to Parliament, an anachronism that grew more absurd as each storm claimed more streets. The Act ended this status as a rotten borough, acknowledging at last what the sea had long since demonstrated, that Dunwich was no longer a town at all. A new church, St. James's, rose in 1832 to serve the remaining villagers. It stood on safer ground, inland from the collapsing eastern edge, where All Saints had kept its vigil since the early medieval period. All Saints had been abandoned in the 1750s and was without a rector since 1755, its congregation long since dispersed or departed. Burials continued in the churchyard until the 1820s, even as the building itself surrendered to wind and salt air. Artists came to capture the ruin in its final decades. The painter J.M.W. Turner sketched the church tower around 1827, its stone already weathered and tilting. Thomas Lingwood painted it again in 1904, the very year the cliff edge reached its foundations. The collapse came slowly, then with finality. Portions of masonry tumbled onto the beach through the first decade of the 20th century as the cliff face eroded beneath the structure. On the 12th of November 1919, the last major section of the tower fell into the sea. With it went the final physical remnant of medieval Dunwich. Nearly 13 centuries of continuous ecclesiastical presence, concluded not with ceremony, but with stone striking sand and the eternal sound of waves. Today, Dunwich is home to 183 residents, a figure that would astonish the merchants who once crowded its wharves. What medieval storms began, the North Sea has completed, leaving the town's 8 churches, 2 friaries, and bustling harbour scattered across the seabed. In 2008, archaeologists from Southampton University mapped the submerged ruins with sonar and acoustic cameras, confirming Dunwich as Europe's largest underwater archaeological site. The surveys identified the remains of St. Peter's Church, the Blackfriars Friary, and structures that once defined a port comparable to 14th century London. The story of Dunwich is neither tragedy nor triumph, but rather a testament to coastal impermanence. Where royal ships once moored and Franciscan friars walked stone cloisters, now only the tide moves freely. If this journey through a drowned city has intrigued you, please consider subscribing to The Past Rebuilt. Your support allows us to continue illuminating these forgotten worlds, one reimagined street at a time.